Dr. Jayraj's Literary Lens presents Part 2, Lecture 16, Post-Marxist Theory, Reimagining Marxism in the Modern Age. This lecture is prepared and presented by Dr. S. Joseph Arul Jayraj, former Head and Associate Professor of English, St. Joseph's College, Autonomous, Trichy, Tamil Nadu, India. Introduction. Karl Marx's theories of class struggle, capitalism, and revolution laid the groundwork for 20th century socialism. However, post-Marxist theory emerged in the late 20th century to address gaps in Marxist analysis. Scholars like Ernesto Laclau, Chantal Mouffe, and Nancy Fraser argue that classical Marxism overemphasizes economic structures at the expense of culture, identity, and social movements. Laclau and Mouffe, 56. This talk defines post-Marxism, explores its key features, and evaluates its relevance in modern academic and political discourse. Post-Marxist theory, emerging in the late 20th century, critiques and expands on classical Marxist thought by addressing its limitations in explaining modern power dynamics, identity politics, and globalization. While Marxism focuses on material conditions and class struggles, post-Marxism, as developed by theorists like Ernesto Laclau and Chantal Mouffe, emphasizes discourse, hegemony, and subjectivity. Laclau and Mouffe. This chapter explores how post-Marxist theory is applied in literary analysis to examine how texts critique capitalism, identity, and power structures beyond economic determinism. By analyzing examples from authors such as Margaret Atwood and Zadie Smith, this talk illustrates how literature reflects and challenges the complexities of contemporary, globalized societies. Theory: Foundational concepts of post-Marxism. Post-Marxism began as a dialogue between Marxism and post-structuralist thinkers like Jacques Derrida and Michel Foucault. It rejects the idea that capitalism's collapse is inevitable, instead focusing on the interplay of power, discourse, and identity. Unlike Marxist structuralism, which sees economic forces as the primary driver of history, post-Marxism emphasizes the fluidity of social relations and the importance of agency. A core concept is hegemony, adapted from Antonio Gramsci's work. While Gramsci viewed hegemony as a tool for ruling classes to maintain power, post-Marxists expand it to include marginalized groups' efforts to challenge dominant narratives. For example, climate activists might use discourse to reframe environmental issues as a matter of social justice rather than just economic policy. Key features of post-Marxist thought. 1. Rejection of economic determinism. Post-Marxism argues that capitalism cannot be understood solely through class and economic structures. It incorporates analyses of race, gender, and ecology. 2. Discourse and language. Inspired by Derrida, post-Marxists view language as central to shaping political meaning. For instance, the term climate crisis carries different implications than climate change, influencing public responses. 3. Radical pluralism. Post-Marxists support alliances among diverse social movements, for example, labor rights and LGBTQ+ rights, to achieve collective goals. Mouffe, 45. 4. Focus on contingency. Unlike Marx's deterministic views, post-Marxism emphasizes unpredictable, contingent events that shape history. Harvey, 78. Major thinkers and their contributions. Ernesto Laclau and Chantal Mouffe. In Hegemony and Socialist Strategy, 1985, they argue that social movements must recognize the complexity of identities and avoid rigid class hierarchies. 127. Their concept of articulation explains how marginalized groups form coalitions. Nikos Poulantzas. He redefined the role of the state in capitalist societies, arguing that capitalists do not wholly control the state, but operate as a mediating force. Nancy Fraser. In Social Justice in the Age of Identity Politics, she critiques Marxism's neglect of recognition and care, advocating for a dual orientation toward redistribution, economic equality, and recognition, cultural inclusion. Key concepts of post-Marxist theory. Post-Marxism rejects the rigid economic determinism of classical Marxism, arguing that power operates through cultural and ideological means. Two central concepts are hegemony and discourse. Hegemony, a term popularized by Antonio Gramsci, refers to the cultural dominance of the ruling class achieved through consent rather than coercion. Post-Marxists like Laclau and Mouffe update this concept to show how identities, for example, gender, race, class, are constructed and contested through language and power. Laclau and Mouffe discourse, another key idea, refers to the ways language shapes social realities and power hierarchies. By analyzing discourse, literature can reveal how marginalized groups resist oppressive systems. Practice. Post-Marxist theory in literature. Analyzing power, identity, and global capitalism. Application in literature. 1. Zadie Smith's White Teeth explores intersecting identities in a globalized Britain. Through characters like Irie Jones, a mixed-race teenager, Smith examines how class, race, and gender are discursively produced and resisted. Post-Marxist theory helps analyze how Irie's identity is shaped by colonial histories, economic inequality, and cultural hegemony. For example, her struggles with Englishness reflect the destabilization of fixed national identities under late capitalism, a theme central to post-Marxist thought. Laclau and Mouffe. The novel also critiques the myth of cosmopolitanism as a form of hegemonic inclusion masking systemic inequalities. 2. Margaret Atwood's Oryx and Crake, 2003, critiques neoliberal capitalism and its impact on identity and ecology. The novel's dystopian society, dominated by corporate power, illustrates how global capitalism constructs social hierarchies through biotechnology and consumerism. Atwood, 45. Post-Marxist analysis reveals how corporate hegemony shapes identities, not as fixed categories, but as fluid, discursive constructs. For instance, the genetic manipulation of plebeians and Quakers reflects the commodification of human life, a theme that aligns with post-Marxist critiques of neoliberal subjectivity. Mouffe. The novel's portrayal of ecological collapse further highlights how power operates through non-economic systems like environmental degradation. Post-Marxist theory and global capitalism. Post-Marxist literary analysis often focuses on how global capitalism undermines traditional class distinctions and creates new forms of oppression. Novels like Oryx and Crake and White Teeth show how capitalism's expansion erodes communal ties and exacerbates identity-based conflicts. By analyzing these texts through a post-Marxist lens, readers can see how power operates through discourses of consumerism, nationalism, and biopolitics. For instance, Smith's portrayal of intergenerational trauma in White Teeth reveals how post-colonial subjects navigate hegemonic narratives of British identity. This approach highlights the fluidity of resistance, as characters employ strategic essentialism to challenge dominant discourses. Critiques and challenges. Post-Marxism faces criticism for its perceived neglect of material conditions. Critics like David Harvey argue that focusing on discourse risks abstraction and underestimates capitalism's economic roots. Harvey, 92. Others, such as Leo Panitch, question whether post-Marxist pluralism weakens the need for centralized socialist strategy. Panitch, 201. Additionally, Post-Marxism's emphasis on identity politics has been accused of fragmenting collective action. For example, some argue that prioritizing gender or racial issues may distract from broader class struggles. Cox 56. Applications in modern movements. Post-Marxism has influenced movements like Occupy Wall Street, which challenged both economic inequality and corporate political power. Environmental activism also incorporates post-Marxist ideas, linking capitalist exploitation to ecological destruction. Baker 89. In feminist theory, post-Marxism helps analyze how patriarchy and capitalism intersect. For instance, feminist campaigns for reproductive rights are framed not just as gender issues, but as critiques of neoliberal labor policies. Conclusion: post-Marxist theory offers a dynamic lens for understanding contemporary politics by integrating Marxism with post-structuralist and feminist insights. While it critiques classical Marxism's deterministic economic focus, it remains rooted in leftist values of justice and emancipation. Despite criticisms, post-Marxism provides vital tools for addressing modern crises of identity, ecology, and inequality. As global challenges evolve, its interdisciplinary approach ensures its relevance in academic and activist circles. Post-Marxist theory enriches literary analysis by broadening the focus from economic structures to the cultural and discursive construction of power. By studying texts like Oryx and Crake and White Teeth, post-Marxist analysis reveals how literature critiques global capitalism and identity politics. This talk invites readers to interrogate how language, hegemony, and subjectivity shape social realities, offering a nuanced understanding of the intersectional struggles in contemporary societies. Thank you.